The main door to our house didn't see much use. Usually, Laura and I came in through the mudroom door or the sliding glass doors off the patio. Just past the entryway, straight ahead, was a sitting room, barely touched, immaculate by Laura's standards. She liked it kept just so. Off to the right, the entryway led down a hallway that connected to the bedrooms, including the master suite, a few spare rooms, and a bathroom. That sitting room stayed dark and undisturbed, heavy drapes drawn tight. Against one wall sat a burgundy couch, with two armchairs positioned on either side, all facing a glass coffee table. I'd never thought much about that setup, not until that particular morning, as I found myself in one of those armchairs, weighed down by my own thoughts. From time to time, I'd sit there alone, especially when Laura was out, letting my mind run through the what-ifs of our marriage, what might happen if I finally walked away. There was a lot on the line. Friends would inevitably choose sides, the house I'd put my sweat into would be lost, and I'd be stuck with years of alimony and drained savings, not to mention the legal fees. Yet Laura, I knew, would remain ever present in my life. She wasn't one to let things go quietly. As I sat there, considering my limited options, I heard the familiar sound of the mudroom door. Laura had returned from her regular grocery run. A part of me wanted to get up, slip into the bedroom, and pretend I hadn't been there at all. If she caught me in the sitting room, it would spark another argument. Lately, arguments had become our norm, just background noise. More often than not, she'd start in on me over something trivial or for no reason at all. It felt as though she thrived on keeping me off balance, stretching out disagreements, turning every small thing into a week-long saga. I'd end up doing whatever it took to keep the peace, if only for a short reprieve until the next blow-up. After over 10 years of marriage, I often felt there were only two ways out, divorce or death. But somehow, I hung in there, mostly for my own sanity than out of any effort to please her. I listened as the freezer door closed, which meant she'd put the frozen food away. Soon, she'd likely call out, telling me to grab the rest of the bags from the car. That was her routine, giving orders, expecting instant compliance, judging my every move. Actually, put the canned goods in the other cabinet, she'd say sharply, never fully satisfied. I held off responding, trying to delay the inevitable, waiting for her to shout my name or, worse, use that whistle she'd adopted, like I was some obedient pet. That whistle was starting to get to me more than anything. But instead of calling me, I heard her footsteps growing closer to the sitting room. She must have been standing just outside in the hallway, checking to see if she was alone. I sat there, barely breathing, listening carefully. She probably thought she should have texted me that she was on her way back but dismissed the thought, assuming I was in the backyard working on one of my projects. Then I heard her phone dial, just a few feet away. "Hey, can you talk right now?" she asked, her tone light but carrying something more beneath it. Cute, why was she calling him here and now? "So, we're still good for Friday afternoon," she continued. "I'll give him a call around noon to be sure. I'll have a couple of hours free. Same as last time, I'll leave the back gate unlocked for you, so swing by around 1. There was a short silence, then she replied with a playful tone, "Oh, cute, you know I love it when you handle things. All right, got to check on the husband now. See you Friday." I heard her phone snap shut, followed by her footsteps moving away toward the sliding door. Then came that whistle, loud and sharp, calling toward the backyard, assuming I'd be working out there. She had no idea I was sitting just a few feet away, my pulse pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I'd been in tense situations before, and training kicked in. First rule, stay calm. Unless there's an immediate threat, use what you've learned to your advantage. Keep your face neutral, control your breathing, and don't let on. I got up and made my way to the den, calling out, "I'm here, just needed to grab something from the bathroom. I've got to make a quick run to the hardware store for a few things." My voice sounded steady enough, but I was careful not to look her in the eye. I could hardly believe I'd managed to speak at all without confronting her on the spot. She looked over as I passed, catching the flush in my cheeks. "You should be wearing a hat," she snapped, as sharp as ever. "You're already turning red. I don't want to see your skin peeling off in a couple of days. And before you go, bring in the groceries, and don't take all day doing it." She tossed her phone into her purse on the counter and stepped outside, likely to inspect my work or make a mental list of things I hadn't done right. That was Laura to a T, every instruction a command, usually with a dose of criticism. Once she was outside, I went straight to her purse, took out her phone, and checked the last number she'd dialed. Memorizing it quickly, I put the phone back where I found it, then hauled in the grocery bags, put everything away, and headed out in my truck. But I wasn't going to the hardware store. Instead, I drove to a nearby park, parked, and sat for a few minutes, replaying her conversation in my head to make sure I remembered every detail. I even wrote down notes, determined to capture every word. There was no mistaking what I'd heard. Laura was cheating, and she was bold enough to arrange it right here in our own home, probably even in our bed while I was at work. A surge of anger hit me, but I stayed seated, holding it in, trying to plan my next move. The realization stung even more as it hit me. I'd been working hard every day, unknowingly funding her affair, keeping her comfortable while she betrayed me. But who was this guy she called Ryan? He sure wasn't her dad. The phone number had a local area code, and her parents lived out in California. Early in our marriage, she'd occasionally called me Daddy in this teasing way, which I found strange, though I figured it was her way of hinting at wanting kids. Years later, when we decided against having children, she seemed more relieved than disappointed. She always had that daddy's girl attitude, but this Ryan was definitely no father figure. I channeled my anger into figuring out a plan, turning over the possibilities in my head. Laura planned to let him in through the back gate on Thursday, meaning he'd probably park somewhere close and walk down the alley to meet her. If I could catch him there, I'd finally see the man who'd come between us. My guess was he'd park his car at the nearby park, which was just a short walk to our place. But who exactly was he, and how could I find out more? The most straightforward option came to mind, calling the number I'd memorized from her phone. Maybe I could have someone call and pretend it was a wrong number, just to draw out his name. It would work better if a woman made the call, but who could I ask for help with that? Laura's best friend, Karen, crossed my mind. If anyone had insight, it would be her. They told each other everything. Her sister might have known, but ever since her messy divorce, the two of them had drifted apart, so that was a dead end. I had to consider Karen carefully. I'd known her as long as I'd known Laura, and she'd always treated me well. But friends tend to stick together in situations like this. Karen was married to Greg, a guy a little older than her whom I respected. They seemed to have a solid marriage, and I counted Greg as a friend, even if we weren't especially close. If he knew anything, maybe he would have told me, though he was the type to keep his distance from other people's problems. The main entrance to our house was almost like a decoration. We rarely used it. Most of the time, Laura and I would come and go through the mudroom door or the sliding doors off the patio. Straight ahead as you stepped inside, there was a sitting room, spotless, practically untouched, just the way Laura liked it. Off to the right, at the end of the entryway, a hallway led to the bedrooms, including the master suite, a couple of guest rooms, and a bathroom. That sitting room was always dim and pristine, with thick curtains drawn, barely letting in any light. Against one wall sat a burgundy couch, flanked by two armchairs, all facing a glass coffee table. That room never meant much to me until that morning when I found myself sitting in one of those armchairs, heavy with thoughts. I'd sat there before, usually when Laura was out, running through the endless what-ifs of our marriage, especially the one that lingered most. What would happen if I just left? There was so much tied up in this life, friends who take sides, the house I'd worked so hard on, which I'd likely lose, and the years of alimony I'd owe, not to mention losing a good chunk of my savings and being drained by legal fees. Even after all that, Laura wouldn't just disappear from my life, she'd fight tooth and nail. As I sat there, trying to work through my options, I heard the mudroom door open. Laura was back from her usual grocery trip. A part of me knew I should get up, pretend I'd been in the bedroom. If she found me sitting there, it would just trigger another argument. Arguments had become as regular as the ticking of a clock, filling the background. Most times, she'd start in on me over some minor thing or even just out of nowhere. It almost seemed like she enjoyed throwing me off balance, dragging things out, turning small issues into week-long ordeals. Somehow, I'd always end up giving in just to keep the peace, even if it was only temporary until the next blow-up. After more than 10 years of marriage, it often felt like there were only two ways out, divorce or death. But still, I stayed, maybe more for my own sanity than for her. I heard the freezer door close, which meant she'd put away the frozen items. It wouldn't be long before she'd start calling for me to bring in the rest of the bags. That was her way, giving me orders and expecting me to jump, all while critiquing. Actually, put the canned goods in the other cabinet, she'd bark, never quite satisfied. Wanting to hold off the inevitable, I kept quiet, waiting for her to call my name or, worse, whistle like I was some dog. Lately, that whistle had grated on me more than anything. But instead of calling, I heard her footsteps, soft, drawing closer to the sitting room. If I'd turned, I'd have seen her standing in the hallway, double-checking that she was alone. I held my breath, listening. Maybe she thought she should have called to tell me she was close to home but brushed it off, assuming I was out in the yard working on something. Then I heard her dialing a number on her cell, just a few feet from where I sat. Hey, can you talk right now, she said, casual but with something else beneath her tone. Cute. Why was she calling him here and now? So, are we still on for Friday afternoon? She continued. I'll call him around noon to be safe. I'll have a couple of hours free. Same plan as last time, I'll leave the back gate unlocked, so I'll see you around 1. There was a pause, then her voice softened with a flirtatious tone. Oh, cute, you know I love it when you take care of things. All right, got to check on the husband now. See you Friday. I heard her phone snap shut, followed by her footsteps moving toward the sliding door. Then came that dreaded whistle, directed at the backyard, as she assumed I was working out there. She had no idea I was right there, my pulse thundering in my ears. I'd been in some intense situations before, and my instincts kicked in. First rule, stay calm. Unless there's immediate danger, use what you've learned to your advantage. Keep a blank expression, control your breathing, and stay in control. I stood up and headed toward the den, calling out, I'm here. Just grabbed something from the bathroom. Need to make a quick run to the hardware store for a few things. I did my best to keep my voice steady and avoided looking directly at her. It amazed me that I managed to say all of that without confronting her right then and there. As I walked past, she turned and noticed the flush in my face. You should be wearing a hat, she scolded, sharp as always. You're already getting red. I don't want to see you peeling like a tomato in a couple of days. And before you go, bring in the groceries, and don't take all day. Tossing her phone into her purse on the counter, she stepped outside, probably to survey my work and prepare a fresh list of complaints for when I got back. That was Laura through and through, issuing commands, often with a side of criticism. The moment she stepped outside, I reached into her purse, took out her phone, and checked the last number she'd called. I memorized it quickly, then slipped the phone back, hauled in the groceries, put everything away, and got in my truck. But I wasn't going to the hardware store. Instead, I drove to a nearby park, parked, and spent the next few minutes replaying her conversation in my head, making sure I'd caught every word. I even jotted down notes to keep it all clear. There was no mistaking what I'd heard. Laura was cheating, and she was bold enough to bring her affair into our home, likely in our own bed while I was at work. Anger swelled up, but I kept it contained, forcing myself to think carefully about my next steps. The whole situation hit me like a punch. I'd been working hard every day, unknowingly funding her affair, keeping her comfortable while she betrayed me. But who was this Ryan she was talking to? He sure wasn't her dad. The area code was local, and her folks were all the way out in California. Early in our marriage, she used to call me Daddy in a playful way that struck me as odd. Back then, I thought maybe she was hinting at wanting kids. Later, when we decided against having children, she seemed more relieved than disappointed. She definitely had that daddy's girl vibe, but this Ryan? He was no father figure. I refocused my anger on something productive, trying to come up with a plan. Laura was arranging for him to slip through the back gate on Thursday, meaning he'd likely park nearby and walk down the alley. If I could catch him in the act, I'd finally come face to face with the man tearing apart my marriage. My best guess was that he'd leave his car at the park, just a short walk from our place. But who exactly was he, and how could I find out more? A straightforward approach came to mind: call the number I'd memorized from her phone. Maybe I could have someone else make the call, pretend it was a wrong number, and see if they could get his name. It would be easier if a woman called, but who could I ask? Laura's best friend, Karen, crossed my mind. If anyone had a clue, it'd be her. They shared everything. Her sister might have known, but after her messy divorce, they'd grown distant, so that was a dead end. I had to think carefully about Karen. I'd known her almost as long as I'd known Laura, and she'd always treated me well. But friends tend to take sides when things get messy. Karen was married to a guy named Greg, someone a bit older whom I respected. They seemed to have a solid marriage, and I considered Greg a friend, though we weren't especially close. If he'd known anything, maybe he'd have mentioned it, but he was the type to avoid sticking his nose into other people's issues. Still, it might be worth reaching out. Greg usually spent Saturdays at the golf course, where he volunteered as a goodwill ambassador in exchange for a few free rounds each week. On the drive over to the course, I ran through my plan carefully in my mind. I couldn't just drop this on Greg, I had to be subtle. If he passed it along to Karen and she brought it up with Laura, it would all go up in flames. So, once we were settled in the golf cart heading to check the 7th hole, I started with, "Hey Greg, I've got a bit of a hypothetical for you." He glanced over, curious but cautious, as I went on. "If you had a private conversation with someone, would you keep it between you two, or would you feel like you'd have to tell Karen?" Greg shot me a puzzled look, driving a few yards ahead before he answered. "Are you asking me to keep something from Karen?" he asked, eyebrows raised, clearly intrigued. I clarified, "I'm just curious if you two share absolutely everything, even if it's said in confidence, just hypothetically." Greg steered off the path onto the grass and turned to face me, looking more engaged than I'd expected. "If you've got a real question, go ahead," he said, his expression serious. "If you tell me something in confidence, I won't bring it up out of nowhere, but if Karen asks me directly, I'm not going to lie. That's just my way, man." Taking a deep breath, I realized Greg might be holding back more than he'd initially let on. So, I came out with it. "Do you know anything about an affair my wife might be having?" Greg's expression softened, and I sensed he'd been carrying something around. "Look," he began, "I don't know if it's still going on, but I do know about what happened last New Year's at the Holden's party." Everyone had gone outside for the fireworks, and Karen started feeling lightheaded. The champagne hit her harder than she'd thought. So, she went upstairs to the bathroom. While she was in there, she heard someone try the doorknob but didn't say anything. After freshening up, she stepped out and heard some noises down the hall near the bedrooms. She thought someone might be sick or in trouble, so she went to check it out. That's when she saw Laura up against the wall with some guy. This guy had his hands all over her, and Laura had her legs wrapped around him. They were fully into it. Greg continued, "Laura saw Karen standing there and just gave her a smirk, waved her off like it was nothing unusual. On the way home, Karen told me everything. Later, Laura brushed it off to Karen, calling it a one-time mistake, blaming it on the alcohol and a heated argument you two had. She said the guy, someone named Ryan Moore, who's got a rough reputation, had been the one pushing things. According to Greg, Ryan was known around town as a troublemaker who'd married into wealth. His wife was a lawyer. Karen had asked Greg not to mention it, hoping to keep things from blowing up since Laura swore it was a one-off incident. But Greg had always felt uneasy, promising himself that if I ever asked directly, he wouldn't hold anything back. He admitted he'd been carrying the guilt for months, feeling bad about keeping it from me. Karen, Greg explained, had been really shaken to hear that Laura's affair might still be ongoing. She felt personally betrayed, as Laura had insisted it was over, and Karen had trusted her. Now, knowing that Laura had likely lied, Karen felt used and hurt. "Karen, there's something I need your help with," I said. "I found a number on Laura's phone. Could you call it, pretend it's a wrong number, and try to get his name? I need to know exactly who she's seeing." Karen, who worked from home as an editor and had a PhD in English literature with some theater experience, agreed without hesitation. Tapping into her acting skills, she planned to use a perfect English accent to catch him off guard. She dialed the number and put her phone on speaker, waiting for him to pick up. "Hello, this is Ryan Moore," a man's voice said on the other end of the line. Karen blinked, then quickly replied, "Oh, sorry, wrong number." She hung up and exhaled, looking frustrated. "Well, that was kind of a letdown," she sighed, but it confirmed what I needed to know: Laura had lied. She was still tangled up with Ryan, just as I'd suspected. We spent some time discussing the best way to move forward. I wanted to catch them red-handed on Thursday, but I also knew the more evidence I could gather, the harder it would be for Laura to wriggle her way out with excuses. "I don't exactly have the budget for a private investigator," I admitted. "With all the legal expenses on the horizon, I need something quick and low-cost to corner her." Karen thought for a moment, then gave me a sly grin. "How about I become your mole?" she suggested. "Mole? What are you talking about?" I asked, intrigued. "What if I play the part of a friend, get closer to her, and see if I can get her to spill the truth? Honestly, I've had it with how she treats everyone. I think I could cook up a story that would make her open up completely," she replied, her eyes bright with determination. For the next hour, we worked out a plan. Karen would reach out to Laura, saying she needed some advice about a personal issue. They'd meet for coffee on Sunday morning. Her husband, Greg, would rig up an old purse of hers with a hidden camera, which she'd set on the table to capture every word and expression. By noon on Sunday, I'd have everything I needed. Early the next morning, Karen sent a text to Laura, "Laura, I really need to talk. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning? I'm in a bit of a mess, and you're the only one I trust with this." Laura's response came quickly. "Are you okay? Is Greg all right?" No, it's not about Greg," Karen replied. Well, remember that New Year's party? I'm sort of in a similar situation." Laura's tone shifted immediately. "Oh, I get it. Yeah, I can definitely help with that. How about 10 o'clock at that new coffee shop at the mall? Let's find a nice, quiet corner," she replied, probably thrilled at the thought of Karen joining her in her escapades. On Sunday, Karen arrived early and picked a table outside, under the shade of a canopy. She positioned the modified purse on the table, adjusted the camera angle, and ran a quick audio test. Everything was in place. The camera would turn on with a single press of a button, and Greg had made sure it was as discreet as possible. The purse's design even hid the lens and microphone holes, blending them into the pattern. When Laura arrived, Karen smiled and asked, "Could you grab us some coffee? I'll hold down our spot." This was the quietest place I could find. As Laura walked off, Karen hit the button to start recording. Once they were seated, Karen launched into her rehearsed story. "So, there's this guy who's shown interest in me. I've never cheated on Greg, but, well, it's been ages since he's really noticed me," she said, leaning forward as though genuinely conflicted. "I wanted to ask you because you've been through this before. Do you think I'd regret it?" Laura's eyes lit up. Girl, go for it. I mean, I've always wondered why you stayed with Greg. He's nice and all, but you're young and gorgeous, you deserve some fun. So, no regrets? Karen asked, leaning in with admiration. You seem to have this all under control. But, was that New Year's thing really just a one-off? Laura chuckled, totally relaxed. Oh, honey, no. I only said that because I knew you'd panic. It wasn't a one-time thing, and now that you're in a similar spot, we can really talk. The plan was working flawlessly. Karen kept her act up, showing interest and egging Laura on to reveal more. Laura, clearly thrilled to have a partner in crime, eagerly shared the hidden details of her double life. So, I'm considering giving it a shot myself, but where did it all begin with you and Ryan? Are you two still, you know? Karen leaned in, pretending to be eager for every detail. You should see your eyes light up right now, she teased, keeping Laura comfortable. If you're not fired up yet, I bet you will be in a few minutes. Laura's eyes sparkled as she dove into her story. Well, here's the scoop with Ryan, she began. It actually kicked off a couple of months before New Year's, at the Holdens' Halloween party. I was in that leopard print outfit, remember? Ryan kept giving me these looks, and I was throwing them right back. When his wife stepped away to help with the trick-or-treaters, and John was out by the fire, Ryan came over and whispered for me to meet him upstairs in 5 minutes. I just nodded, you know how packed those parties get. The Holdens' place is massive, it was easy to slip away. I made my way up the hallway to the landing, and there he was. He kissed me, dragged me into the bathroom, locked the door, and let's just say that leotard didn't stay on for long. Karen feigned surprise. Wow, Laura, sounds like quite a moment. Laura smirked. You don't even know. Ryan is. Let's just say he's got everything I could want in a lover. He's strong, rough, and he knows how to take what he wants, none of that mushy, I love you nonsense. Between Halloween and New Year's, we hooked up at least 20 times. That night, we planned on a rerun of Halloween, but you were in the bathroom, so we settled for the hallway. Karen raised an eyebrow. So it didn't stop there. You're still seeing him? You better believe it, Laura replied without hesitation. I'll be seeing him next week at my place, in my own bed. Keeping her tone light, Karen pressed on, that's wild. But what about John? Doesn't the guilt ever get to you? Laura scoffed, rolling her eyes. John's my husband, not my lover. They're two totally different roles. John's there to follow my lead, Ryan's there for excitement. Sometimes after I've been with Ryan, I'll cool down with John. John's reliable, doesn't push for kids, and trusts me completely. I can control him like a remote. I'll just start a little jealousy act or pick a random fight, and he's so rattled, he doesn't suspect a thing. Karen looked impressed. So you play the suspicious wife just to keep him off balance? Exactly, Laura replied, almost proud. I'll even sniff his clothes when he gets home, pretending I'm checking for perfume. Or we'll watch a movie about a cheating husband, and I'll go on and on about how I'd never stand for that. Meanwhile, I'm doing whatever I please. I know exactly where John is at any given moment because he always checks in with me first, so my plans go off without a hitch. Karen, fighting to mask her shock, responded, so, Ryan's not the only one. Laura laughed, clearly amused. Oh, no. There've been others. The first one was right after we got married. He was barely legal, and I'd see him at the grocery store. That one went on for 6 months, bouncing between hotel rooms, until he got too clingy. After that, I had a few one-offs, a salesman who liked things on the wilder side, but he only came through town occasionally. Ryan's just lasted longer because he's everything I want and knows how to be discreet. Karen chuckled to keep Laura comfortable. You're really running the show here. I don't know if I could ever manage something like that with Greg. Laura leaned in, pleased with herself. Life has alphas and drones, Karen. Alphas take what they want. John could have been the one in charge, but he wasn't, so I stepped up. You could have the same freedom if you want it. Just get started with this guy and let Greg settle into his natural role. The more you take charge, the more he'll adapt. It's all about being the queen bee. But aren't you worried about infections or anything? Karen asked, digging for just one more detail. Sometimes I make them use protection, but Ryan's too intense. Getting him to wear anything would be like putting a saddle on a bull. But he's clean. Once, I thought I'd caught something because it stung when I peed, but it turned out just to be irritation from roughness. Laura laughed, enjoying the retelling. The doctor even suggested my husband should be gentler. Karen kept her act up, nodding along as though she was amused by Laura's stories, but inwardly, she was filled with a surge of empathy for John, realizing the depth of Laura's deception. Laura went on, actually, I did end up catching something once, gonorrhea. It was a nightmare. I had to go through these painful injections and take antibiotics for weeks. After that, I decided to be a bit more careful. Karen raised her eyebrows, managing to stay in character. Wow, how did you keep that from John? That's some slick maneuvering. Laura chuckled, obviously pleased with herself. It was easy. John loves his guitar, right? He's always been decent at it too. Anyway, he mentioned wanting to go jam with a buddy, and usually, I'd shut that down since I never let him go out alone. But this time, I just looked at him calmly and said, if that's what you feel you need to do, go ahead. I knew he'd take the bait, and sure enough, he went. When he came back, I hit him with a 2-week argument while I was on the antibiotics. If he'd stayed home, I'd have just found another reason to start a fight. She added with a smug grin, plus, I never have to refuse him in bed. With John, no romance equals no intimacy. He won't make a move unless I'm all lovey-dovey, which, thanks to my little games, barely ever happens. Karen sensed that she'd gotten everything she needed, and it was time to end the conversation. She thanked Laura, expressing exaggerated appreciation, and left quickly, heading straight home. When she arrived, Greg and I joined her to review the footage. Even Greg, who knew Laura's more superficial charm, was taken aback by the brutal, manipulative way she spoke about John. I wasn't exactly surprised, but hearing the coldness in her voice stung all the same. Turning to Karen, I brought up a thought that had been brewing in the back of my mind. One person we haven't discussed is Ryan's wife, Susan. Do you know anything about her? I mean, she's probably aware he's fooling around, but if she doesn't, she has a right to know. And if she does know, she might warn him and ruin my plan. Karen took a steadying breath and decided to reach out. She dialed the number and waited. Hello, Susan Moore. This is Karen Wells. We've met a few times at the Holden's parties. Susan's voice on the other end was friendly but cautious. Oh, hi, Karen. I remember you. What's up? Susan, this might sound a bit odd, but are you alone right now? Is this a good time for a private conversation? Karen asked gently. Yes, I'm here by myself, Ryan's out. Is something wrong? Is this legal? Karen chose her words carefully. Well, it might be, in a sense. Susan, there's really no easy way to put this, so I'll be direct. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but Ryan is having an affair with someone I know. I'm truly sorry, but I thought you had a right to know. The line went silent, then Karen heard a soft sob from Susan's end. That bastard, she whispered. He promised me it was over, swore he'd ended things a year ago. I gave him one last chance, and he's been lying to my face this whole time. I told him if he ever did this again, it would be over. Karen offered her support, speaking softly as Susan pulled herself together. Susan, I know this isn't my place, but if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Susan steadied her breath and replied, "Thank you, Karen, but this time I'm done. He'll never set foot in my bedroom again. I've got a strong prenuptial agreement, and with solid proof of his cheating, he'll be out of the house without a penny. He doesn't have a real job, just escorts me to events and sneaks around. He'll be left with nothing until he can find another woman to take him in. Susan, I can get you the proof you need, but you have to promise me you'll play it cool for a few days. Don't let him suspect anything. Can you manage that?" Karen asked. Susan's voice grew firm. "I promise. I'll stay as cool as ice until I have everything in my hands." They arranged to meet Monday afternoon, and the following day, Karen contacted me at work to update me. We agreed to meet at Susan's office at 1 o'clock. When I arrived, I introduced myself to Susan, and she welcomed me in as Karen handed over a small video camera, ready to document everything. "I'm John, the husband of the woman Ryan's been involved with," he said, nodding toward the camera. "And here she is, in her own words." He hit play, watching Susan's face as she took in the footage. The screen might have been small, but the audio was clear, and every word hit its mark. As her eyes filled with tears, John moved around the desk, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I understand what you're feeling," he said gently. "I only just discovered my wife's betrayal myself. But you've known about Ryan's ways for a while, haven't you?" Susan gave a slight nod, sniffing. "I've endured his intimidation for years," she admitted. "More times than I can count, I've been scared of him. But I'm past that now. I want him to pay for what he's done." "Well, Susan, I'm working on a plan, and I wanted to ask if you'd like to be involved. It's happening either way, but you deserve the choice." Susan's eyes sharpened with resolve. "What exactly are you planning? Are we talking violence?" John held her gaze, his voice calm. "Let's just say it could get rough. I'm not planning on killing anyone, but I am ready to make Ryan remember this. You good with that?" Susan smiled, a bitter edge to her expression. "I'm 5 feet 5 inches and he's over 6 feet 2 inches. I've never been able to stand up to him physically, and honestly, John, I doubt you'd fare much better if you tried to fight fair with him." John gave a dry smirk. "Don't worry. This won't be a fair fight. I'll make sure he goes down, one way or another." Susan nodded, her voice firm. "Count me in. Just save me a small piece of him when you're done." After leaving Susan's office, John had no desire to go back to work. The sting of hearing Laura's words on the video replayed in his mind, her cruel mockery of him cutting deep. He'd always seen himself as the peacekeeper in their marriage, someone willing to compromise for stability. But Laura's portrayal of him as her personal puppet stung in ways he hadn't expected. Well, she'd soon see a side of him she clearly never expected. On his way home, John considered confronting Laura early, just to watch her face as she tried to explain herself to a husband who was no longer passive and compliant. Although he had no intention of forgiving her, the thought of giving her a glimpse of his real resolve brought him a sense of satisfaction, one he imagined might linger on those long, empty nights she had coming. Tuesday was spent running through scenarios, replaying potential confrontations in his head. He knew no plan was guaranteed, but he felt more prepared with every possibility he imagined. He worked off his anger at the office gym, spending hours pushing himself harder than ever. At home, tension hung in the air. He and Laura barely spoke, and while she typically nagged him about everything, his uncharacteristic silence kept her at bay. She seemed almost relieved when he called her from his desk on Thursday morning, letting her see his office number to confirm he was at work. He mentioned he'd be tied up in meetings all afternoon and would have his phone off, and her sigh of relief made it clear she thought he was back to his usual routine. Meanwhile, Laura began prepping for her rendezvous, no doubt confident she had him wrapped around her finger. Just before 1 o'clock, Susan dropped John off a few blocks from his house. Dressed in jeans, a t-shirt and sturdy running shoes, he slipped into the backyard through the side gate and hid behind a thick bush. He checked his phone, on mute and ready. At 1:45, he spotted Laura stepping into the backyard, wearing a skimpy bikini, her eyes scanning the alley as she unlocked the gate. Satisfied, she strolled back to a lounge chair under the shade of the pecan tree, waiting with a smug confidence for her guest to arrive. This was the moment John had been preparing for, and he steadied himself. Moving silently, he slipped back through the half-open gate, made his way around to the front door, and unlocked it with his key, feeling his heart pounding with anticipation. He walked straight to the guest bedroom, where the evidence of Laura's betrayal had been laid bare a few days ago. He picked up the screwdriver and bag of hardware he'd set aside and headed to their bedroom. In under a minute, he had the deadbolt installed on the inside of the door, securing it from the inside. He wedged a small piece of wood between the door and the jamb to keep it from closing too early, just in case Laura decided to shut it before he was ready. Once everything was set, he returned to the guest room. He strapped on the brass knuckles, grabbed the video camera, and took a few calming breaths, mentally preparing himself for what was to come. Anything could go wrong. Laura might open the gate too soon, or Ryan might show up before he was fully prepared. But the timing held, and John focused on controlling his breathing, letting the rage simmer, fueling him for what lay ahead. Standing by the half-open door of the guest bedroom, he clenched the brass knuckles in his right hand, camera in his left, recording every sound. Moments later, he heard the sliding glass door to the backyard open, followed by his wife's laughter mingling with a man's deep voice. John imagined Ryan touching her, oblivious to everything but their lust. Peering out, he saw Laura's bikini top already off as they moved eagerly toward the bedroom, leaving the door wide open in their carelessness. Keeping low and quiet, John crept closer, recording every moment. He watched as Ryan held Laura against him, her fingers fumbling with the buttons on his shirt, her eyes closed. John carefully placed the camera on the dresser by the door, pointed at the bed, making sure it would capture every incriminating second. Anger gripped him as he stepped back into the hallway, steadying himself, every nerve in his body ready for action. The next 5 minutes felt like an eternity as they continued to undress, unaware of his presence. From the hallway, he kept his eyes on the camera, hearing Laura murmur, "Daddy," several times, her voice filled with a tone he'd never heard before. Each word confirmed what he already knew. "God, I've missed you," Ryan muttered, his voice low. "Feels like it's been forever." John glanced back into the room, just in time to see Ryan sink between her legs. Laura let out a moan that was both foreign and deeply cutting. He couldn't hold back any longer. With one last look at his brass-knuckled fist, he walked into the room. Laura's eyes widened as she noticed the movement, just as he shoved Ryan in the ribs, sending him stumbling to the side. "Get your hands off my wife!" John roared, his voice full of fury. Ryan's face twisted in confusion, but in an instant, he assessed John as a lesser threat, his usual tactic of intimidation kicking in. He began threatening John, circling the bed in an attempt to maneuver him into backing down. Laura, kneeling and clutching at the bedspread, shrieked, "Go away. Don't touch him," though it was unclear whether she was speaking to John or Ryan. John took a step back, letting Ryan think he was relenting, then leaned forward and drove his brass-knuckled fist hard into Ryan's chest, putting every ounce of strength he had into the blow. Ryan crumpled to the floor, gasping, his chest heaving in panic as he struggled for air. John moved quickly, straddling him, pinning him down as Ryan's hands clawed helplessly at the floor, desperate to find something to grasp. John raised his fist and drove it into Ryan's face, feeling the crunch of bone as blood poured from his nose and mouth, pooling around his chin and neck, making it hard for him to catch a breath. Every strike felt like a release, a culmination of everything John had held inside for years. Satisfied with the scene I'd left behind, I turned toward the door, ignoring Laura's panicked shouts. "What are you doing? Are you insane? Go back and help him," she screamed, torn between pleading and demanding, as if she couldn't decide whether I was leaving or coming for her next. I walked up to the door, kicked out the piece of wood holding it open, and slammed it shut, locking it with a solid click. I turned to face Laura, and in that instant, fear took over her expression as she realized we were trapped together, with no one coming to her rescue. Keeping my expression steady, I approached her slowly. "John, please, this isn't what it looks like," she whimpered, tears springing to her eyes. "He forced me. Ryan's a real monster. He threatened me, said he'd hurt you if I didn't go along." I shook my head, still closing the distance between us as she attempted to back away. "Save it, liar. I know you've been with him for months." Her pleas fell on deaf ears as I walked over to where Ryan lay on the floor, struggling for air, his face a sickly blue from the lack of oxygen and the blood pooling around him. I grabbed him by the legs and dragged him closer to the bed, rolling him onto his side to let the blood drain from his mouth. Then, I grabbed a pair of handcuffs from the dresser and secured his wrists and ankles to the bedposts, making sure he couldn't move an inch. Turning back to Laura, I pulled her off the bed and twisted her arms behind her, locking her wrists with another set of handcuffs. Without a word, I led her to the bathroom and sat her on the closed toilet lid. "Please, John, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I tightened my fists, letting her see the glint of the brass knuckles still on my hand. "Now's your chance to come clean," I said coldly. "Start from the beginning, how you met, why you decided to betray me, and what made you think it was all right to treat me like a fool. And I want the whole story. You can start by telling me about every other guy you've been with over the last decade," I told her, struggling to keep my composure. "Since your plans with that coward in there have changed, we've got all day." Laura's gaze darted around the small space as she considered her options. She knew I already had some of the details, but not the extent. She seemed to weigh the benefits of downplaying her actions against the risks of being caught in another lie. Cautiously, she decided to start slow. "John, I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her voice soft and pleading. "Ryan is big and pushy. The first time was at a party, at the Holdens. He lured me upstairs. I didn't know he wanted, she stammered, there was no one around to help. Even Karen saw him force me against my will." "When was that?" I asked, knowing she was testing the waters with her lie. Laura's mind raced, likely guessing that Karen or Greg had been the ones to expose her secret. But she knew Karen was only aware of the New Year's incident. "It happened at New Year's," she lied, her voice trembling. But her story crumbled instantly. "You're lying, it started on Halloween. And by New Year's, you'd already slept with him at least 20 times. Her face went pale. "Who told you that?" she asked, her voice strangled. "You'd be surprised. How many people do you think know about this? For all you know, he's been bragging to everyone in town. But that doesn't matter now." Anger flashed in her eyes. "Was it Karen who spilled everything? I'll tear her apart," she seethed. "I know something about her that would ruin her marriage. You can bet I'm going to use it against her." "Oh, you mean Karen's new lover, Rod?" "Yeah, we all know about him. In fact, we made him up specifically for you," I said, savoring the shock on Laura's face. "I even suggested the name. Thought about calling him Dick or Lance too, just for a little extra sting. And yes, Karen recorded all your talks. We have plenty of footage queued up, ready to be delivered to all the right addresses when I decide, including your dear dad, your mom, and that brother you're always badmouthing." Laura visibly recoiled, and I smiled. "And actually, it wasn't even Karen who first hinted to me about your betrayal. She didn't know all the details, she thought that your New Year's fling was just a one-off. But do you remember last Saturday, when you called your beloved right in the hallway and went on about his big tool? You told me everything I needed to know, all by yourself." I watched her face go blank with horror and shame. "I think I've heard enough," I finished, the contempt clear in my voice. "From here on, you can tell it all to my lawyer. Expect divorce papers in a couple of days. I'll consult with him, but I plan to wrap things up with both of you real soon. With that, I pulled out my phone and dialed Susan. Susan, you can come in and collect your trash, I said, laughing softly at her reply before hanging up. Grabbing Laura by the shoulders, I led her back to the bedroom to show her the remains of her little fling. Ryan lay there naked, handcuffed, bloodied, and gasping for air. Laura's face drained of color as she gagged, clearly fighting the urge to throw up. I sat her down on the bed, turned off the camera, and waited. A few moments later, Susan appeared at the doorway, composed but ready. Well, Susan, I left you a bit of him, though he's not exactly looking his best, I said, gesturing at Ryan. Here's your latest lover and my soon-to-be ex-wife. Anything you'd like to say to her? Susan walked over to where Laura sat, and without a word, slapped her hard across the face, leaving a bright red mark. You're pathetic, she said coldly. You have no idea how much I would give to have a husband like yours. From everything I know, he's a decent man, especially compared to the trash you threw it all away for. You really are a fool. What are we going to do with him? Susan asked, looking at me, her voice laced with anger. Maybe we should throw her out on the street without a stitch of clothing and let her see how quickly she finds another friend. What do you think? Well, I replied, with dark humor, I did leave his tool intact, though I've got a hunting knife that would handle the job. We could keep it as a souvenir since she's so fond of it. Maybe even lock up his balls to keep the women of this city safe. Susan's smile was bitter. Actually, I'm going to activate the prenuptial agreement. It states that if I catch him cheating, he leaves with nothing, and, well, we've got proof. I'll take him to the hospital and claim he was hurt moving a heavy metal box in the garage. He won't dare dispute it, knowing he'll be broke otherwise. Susan looked back at me thoughtfully. And as for Laura, what's your plan? Taking a deep breath, I laid out the details. Her father is her Achilles heel. I suspect there's a lot she's kept hidden from him, maybe even some issues from her childhood. If things go sour in court, he'll cut her off completely, just like he did with her sister. His reputation is everything. Half of what I have won't last her long, and if need be, I've got enough recorded footage to use as leverage down the line. Turning to Laura, I told her with cold finality, get dressed, grab your car, and go find someplace to cry. You won't have access to your credit cards or the ATM, so I hope there's a few bucks in your wallet. You'll probably need every last penny. I shared a final look with Susan, and we agreed to stay in touch. Though we'd call each other occasionally on lonely days, neither of us was in a hurry to dive back into a new relationship after being burned so badly. In the days that followed, a part of me was haunted by how I'd let my anger toward Laura turn me into someone I barely recognized. Striking her that day reminded me of moments in war, when good people can be pushed to the edge and do things they never thought possible. I vowed never to put myself in that position again. But as for Ryan, I had no regrets. His bruised face, a reminder of his arrogance, was left largely unrepaired since Susan's insurance covered only the basics. She refused to pay for any reconstructive surgery, leaving him with scars and a modest settlement. She kicked him out of their house, and he fell into a deep depression, eventually fading from everyone's memory. Laura accepted a modest settlement and, with little left to her name, begged her sister for a place to stay. Now she's stuck with her regrets, left wondering how she misjudged things so badly. She cringes at terms like alpha male and hierarchy, and has nightmares of that night, sometimes even missing what we had. But me? I don't miss her one bit. What truly mattered to me in the end was reclaiming my life and keeping my dignity. I walked away from the wreckage, free from deception and betrayal. I wasn't about to let this ruin me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be anyone's pawn again.